But I would say in 2 or 3 years, these girls won't be low achievers. I think they will really give them a bit of a go in English, and they're just going to go places. And you know how it's usually, I mean, on average, it's usually about 3 years that children who've come to Australia speaking no English need, if everything else is in place, for them to be really competent in English. 3 years. So give those girls 3 years, I'd say. I mean, look at you know, the girl who was here. I mean, she was brilliant. She was brilliant. And Jai, and even the girl who had who had really poor English, was really getting into it at the end. And one of the key things about these kids is their preparedness to do it. I mean, Song started off really being told each of the witch's words. For the final 20 minutes, Jai wasn't telling her any of them. You know, she was doing it. She was reading them. Now, it may well be she was just matching the whole word with what she was saying, but she wasn't doing it at the beginning, and she was doing it at the end. I would be, these girls will be a real credit to the school.
They were interested in learning, though. They were
yes.
They showed, you know,
yes, they were.
Was a barrier, but everything else they wanted to do.
And it was a barrier that they were overcoming, and that was that thing we were talking about earlier today. It'll work for them. They can make it work for them. And that would be a really key part of my dialogue with that group of girls. Hey, you can make this work for you.
I think the part we're talking about, we're trying to say, well, how do you transfer that, 26 in the class, you've got the whole diversity going on there. I mean, the way we've approached it is basically you need to have the teacher having confidence to do that with whatever group it is. So you might be able to do that with a corrective reading group, you might be able to do that ESL group. They're still working with the mainstream, they still do year 8
yes.
work. So they're just a representation of the kids within the diversity of your own classrooms. But for us to implement it and do it in the secondary level, as I see it, is it's a big take on initially just to deal with the 26 kids in the class. So you do aspects of it. I mean, you build up all those levels. I mean, I do lots of those things. We do, talking about the text and so forth. But in the short term, where you build up more kids having that level, you do it on a small level. And the kids that would not normally have a say or know how they're actually learning can actually be contributing to the class when they come back into the classroom, and they can talk a little bit about themselves. And that gives them a lot of confidence. Yes.
And the children, and that's great. And because remember, one key aspect that we're really wanting to develop is the kids knowing what to do. Kids knowing how to use their knowledge to learn new things, and them being able to say the actions that they used. Yeah, I really want to push that, because if this is going to work, we really need to have the children doing that explicitly. And look, if I were in any of your schools, I would be really encouraging this business of the kids saying what they'll do or saying what they've done, learning to really manage the actions. That will really give results, and without it there won't be the results. And we've never done this. How often in secondary classrooms, we did have, learning logs where kids would jot down how they learn, but how often in systematic ways did we teach kids new ways of thinking and have them say it and practice it and do it automatically? So if we're doing corrective reading, and corrective reading really doesn't push this, I would be making sure the kids can say how they learned, because corrective reading's got text in it, like anything else that's got text. So use that text, but also have the kids say what they did, and try out all the time, try out learning new actions. The actions are critical.
I've got one more thing and I'll be quiet. In terms of having been a materials and technology teacher, where there's a process and where there's a heavy emphasis on evaluating what you actually do, that's I've used that in my way of thinking a lot in the variety of classes I've taught over the years. But that's a component of where kids do reflect on how they've learnt and evaluate how they would do better next time. So that's something that we build on.
Yes.
That's something that I've always been aware of, and I think that's always been a very powerful thing, that they evaluate their own processes
Yes,
and
yeah.
reflect on what the outcome's been.
But I would like to see, this all the way through, in schools where it's almost part of standard, code of teaching practice. Well, we learned all about the humidity today, didn't we? Do we think there's high humidity? The point that John raised earlier, or Rob, you raised earlier, here is a really important one. We were talking about children being able to look, after they've read through a text, being able to look at it and seeing how the sentences, say, segment it into various meanings. Now, when students can see that, again, bells will ring. They can see how to organise the text then. And they can look at they can aim to do this in this way on other occasions. Now, in terms of the activities for helping the kids learn how to deal with the questions, I've mentioned various activities there in your notes, things like what we did with the paraphrasing. So the idea would be to take any text, and if I were going into a class, on my version of the book, I would have some of those yellow stick-on labels, and I'd have the questions. So I would have glanced through it beforehand, just so I knew the questions I was going to prompt the kids towards. And I'd also want to make sure that I had one of the different coloured pads, like a blue pad, and I stuck on each paragraph what the summary was, just so I could, move the kids towards that. Because if I'm really clear on what I'm wanting as the summary or as the questions, I'm more likely to, to get those. So there were various activities, and they're very similar to the paraphrasing, and it might be more sensible to It might be more sensible or more useful if we went on to just go through the paraphrasing bit. Now, the summarising bit. When we come to look at summarising, the key question we're wanting to answer, obviously, is what is the main idea in a paragraph? How can we say it in one sentence? How can we say it as a heading and so on? The summarising, and remember we were doing it earlier today, and we're going to come back to that paragraph that you were looking at summarising. Summarising involves two things. One thing you have to do is to select the main ideas. And that's not so easy. And the second thing you have to do is to synthesise. And so these are two opposite actions, two opposite ways of thinking. You've got to both select, or you've got to, cull out ideas, and you also have to synthesise or integrate. And they're two difficult actions that the children are going to need to learn how to do. Just why we're looking at summarising. This diagram is meant to show your short-term memory at any point. Now, at any point during reading, if we're reading, say, the sentence, the higher the air gets, the cooler it becomes. So we're processing that sentence here. But at that moment, I'm processing it. I've also got in my thinking space a summary of what I've read earlier. I've got a summary of the text here that I read earlier. So I read this sentence, but I've also got a summary of the earlier bits. And that allows me to decide whether or not what I've just read is sensible, reasonable, fits with what was there or not. And so imagine if someone can't summarise. How are they going to build that? And so you've all heard children read where they've read a sentence, they've said one or two words wrong, but they haven't clicked that they're wrong.